I'm so grateful to be here, grateful to be alive and sober with some amount of dignity and integrity and a clear head and a loving heart. Oh, dear God, may the meditations of my heart and the words from my mouth be pleasing to you. So, I travel a lot. This month, going to several cities, and over the next few months, a number of states to carry the message, and I'll travel anywhere because today the stakes are high. Addiction and alcoholism have become a global pandemic. It is a plague on planet Earth. It is America's #1 public health crisis. At this very moment, millions are still sick and suffering and don't know about the spiritual solution to our disease. They don't know about the rooms of recovery. Every year in the United States now, over 250,000 20-something-year-old men and women are dying from fentanyl overdose. That number, 250,000, is double the number of all American military casualties since World War II. That's happening every year, wiping out a generation. And today I hope to answer two questions. This is my mission. Why can't we stop? What is the solution? My hope is to bring education to loved ones and family members to understand that this is not a choice. This is a progressive, chronic, fatal brain disease. Not a choice, not a moral failing. So that hopefully families and loved ones and our friends and colleagues who are normies can stop being angry and bitter and move toward compassion and love, and so that we addicts can stop hating ourselves for the egregious behaviors that we lived in for so long, and move toward compassion and love. So first I'm going to tell a little bit about my story so you know why I'm sitting here. I was addicted to alcohol, marijuana, opium, hash, morphine, ketamine, Percocet, Percodan, Vicodin, Restoril, LSD, Quaaludes, Black Beauties, Whippets. Real good. Whip it good. IV heroin and crack cocaine. I went to 47 detoxes, 11 trips to jail, caught 2 felonies, 7 suicide attempts. Gestalt therapy, Jungian therapy, Freudian therapy, psychodynamics, electroshock therapy, 2 Anthony Robbins firewalks, ayahuasca, puke and purge, and I spent one Christmas in sub-zero temperature in a sweat lodge on the Taos Pueblo, tripping on peyote, trying to get sober, with 6 naked, greasy, sweaty, ugly old Indian shaman. I still have nightmares about that. Even after doing EMDR trauma therapy, can't get that out of my head. I'm from Akron, Ohio. That's where my disease began. In fact, the first time I was ever arrested was 2 blocks from Dr. Bob's house. And I'm very proud of that. I didn't know Dr. Bob at the time. I wish I had. I started drinking when I was 12. First of all, I'm adopted. And I just met my birth family in the last 3 or 4 years. In my book, Walk the Talk with Step 12, I mentioned that my birth name was William Joseph Weaver, which makes me Bill W. I thought that was kind of a corny joke, and I put it in the book. And I got a call one night from this guy who said he was my twin brother. Turns out it was true. And he had the same birth name, and we had a heroin addict for a mother who was popping out babies and selling us for $5,000 a piece. And he found me. I am an Episcopal priest. Now there's life beyond your wildest dreams. That's nothing this crack whore ever thought I'd be doing, was being a priest. And he's a Baptist minister. We both teach the steps. I teach it in treatment. He teaches it in the Georgia prison system. And we both got clean and sober on the same month of the same year. That crazy twin thing, you know? And there are 6 other brothers and sisters. We're all addicts. We're all alcoholics. Both birth parents died. This is a genetic illness. If you have certain symptoms, I had them all. So my adopted family, Bruce and Mary Evelyn, they met before World War II when they were in high school. They were married 69 years. They died within 1 month from each other. I never heard them fight, never raised their voice to each other. They didn't drink, they didn't smoke. They wouldn't say shit if they had a mouthful of it. They were the kindest people and never touched alcohol. Bruce lined up the convertible automobiles for the Football Hall of Fame parade just south of Akron every year. And one year, the Board of Trustees of the Football Hall of Fame gave him a whiskey decanter made out of porcelain that looked like the Football Hall of Fame. And inside that bottle was 80-year-old Jim Beam whiskey. I was 8 years old when it arrived. Bruce never drank, but he loved football. So he built a shadow box in his den. And he put that bottle in it with a track light shining on it like it was a shrine to the Virgin Mary or something. And I remember the day it arrived. They were a very strict family, Pentecostal. My grandfather was a Pentecostal minister. And alcohol, very bad. And at 8 years old, I wanted to find out why. So every time I was alone, I'd go into the den, I'd pick that bottle up and shake it and listen to it. The cork in the bottle was the football, which is the roof of the Football Hall of Fame. If you've ever seen it, it's a giant football makes the roof. That was the cork in the bottle. Well, I was 12. I had a growth spurt. One weekend, they were going to take me to a relative's farm and leave me for the weekend while they went on a trip. And I said, I'm not going. I'm staying home. And Bruce talked to Mary Evelyn, and he said, you know what? You're a good kid, and you can certainly take care of yourself for a weekend. We're going to let you stay home. If you touch that bottle, I'm going to whip your ass till it looks like peppermint candy. Oh, I swear, Dad, no, I wouldn't do that. Soon as the car disappeared, I ran into the den, grabbed that bottle, took it into the kitchen, filled up a tea kettle, got a head of steam going, very carefully peeled the seal off that bottle. I saw that on I Love Lucy. And it worked. And I had my first drink. Instantly, the wall went down that separated me from every other human being. And I felt courageous. I felt like a superhero. Over the course of the weekend, I drank that entire bottle. I spent most of the weekend running around outside at night naked. Yeah, I don't know why that is. Every time I drank, I took my clothes off. If I smoked crack, I tore them off. Aren't you glad I'm sober? I think there's a line in the big book that says a 65-year-old fat, naked crack whore is an unlovely creature. That was me. So the game was on. The allergy kicked in right away, and I started drinking every day. I stole liquor from our Italian neighbors. They had casks full of wine and grappa, and I would take dishwashing liquid bottles and rinse them out and go over to their house, steal the booze, hide it in my bedroom, lay down in my room and drink all night long, somehow managed to get up and go to school. When I was 16 years old, I got my license, and the next morning, I drank a bottle of grappa, had my first blackout, killed 2 people in an automobile accident. Over the course of my high school days, by the time I was a senior, I had totaled 11 automobiles, had killed 2 people, maimed 4 others who never fully recovered, and blew a kid's hand off with a shotgun. And got arrested a bunch of times for walking around downtown Akron without clothes on. Yeah, that was a real problem for me. Now I get paid to keep my clothes on. So my father came to me one day and he said, I wanted to be an actor. And he said, your mother and I have talked and we think you should go to acting school in New York City so that you won't have to drive. That'll be a solution to your problem because you're going to kill somebody else or kill yourself. And I thought, well, this is a good idea. So when I was 17 years old, I was handed $5,000 in cash, and I took the Amtrak from Akron to New York City. My first morning in New York, I was walking around, I saw this business called Abracadabra. They sold costumes and party supplies and magic tricks. And there was a nightclub I wanted to get into. And you had to either be very famous, mad sexy, or a freak. Now, I was 17 years old. I trained to be a dancer, to be a tap dancer. And I was ripped and buff, 17 years old, loved being naked in public. I went out and I bought this big straw farmer hat at Abracadabra, a 6-foot-long red ostrich feather boa. This was the 1970s. And a pair of extremely short, very thin, gold lame Daisy Duke shorts. And I took off all my clothes, put on this big straw hat, the red boa, the little lame shorts, and I made a beeline for Studio 54, which was a very famous nightclub at the time. Red carpet, lots of celebrities, limos parked down the block. The doorman decided who could come in, and he sees this half-naked 17-year-old dressed like a freak, and he goes, "Kid, come on in." Like it said in Bill's story, I had arrived. That night I met cocaine, had sex with a lot of celebrities, and I took all my clothes off and danced naked on the dance floor at Studio 54. Now, as a matter of fact, I'm in a documentary that's on Netflix right now called Studio 54. If you watch it, look for a tall, skinny kid in red hot pants with a woman wearing a leopard skin sarong. That's me shaking my ass when I was 17. And so I worked there for a while I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. So I would get hammered all night, and the American Academy classes didn't start till 2 p.m. And I was a teenager, so no problem. I could get plenty of sleep, be out all night doing drugs and alcohol. I couldn't hang on to money to save my life, and somebody said, you know, you should become a male prostitute. I said, that sounds like a good idea. So I did that, and I was stripping of clubs all over New York. Now I'm doing lots of drugs in addition to drinking, and lost a moral a day. After about 2 years of that, I saw an advertisement. They were looking for what they called replacement swing dancers for a Broadway show. They wanted tall, young, athletic males who were trained dancers who would be willing to dance in their jockstrap in a locker room scene, playing a Texas Aggie football player in the Broadway musical, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. Well, I thought, I'm a whore and I dance naked. So this is a no-brainer. So I auditioned. That was my first Broadway show. I did 39 Broadway musicals altogether, traveled all over the world, made crazy money. I was meaner than a snake and just absolutely crazy. Very difficult to work with, super prima donna. I'll speed ahead. You know, that profession really allowed for drugs and alcohol. I had people on staff. I had a manager and a dresser and a guy named Brad who I paid full-time in benefits to follow me around and make sure I made it back to the theater on time. And I used to hide from him. That's how crazy I was. And I was paying him to keep track of me because I didn't want him to see the twisted things I was doing. And I remember we were at a bar somewhere in Wisconsin, and they were trashing the bar, and they had a tabletop Pac-Man machine. I put that in the back of my tour bus so I could put lines of cocaine on it. And they had cup holders, 4 of them, that held 40 ounces. So I put bottles of unblended scotch in that with big bendy straws I got from a truck stop. And I would turn the machine on and do my lines of cocaine. I never played Pac-Man, but I loved hearing waka, 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 waka when I was doing the cocaine. Funny thing about triggers, a few years ago, I was a keynote speaker at the California State Convention of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was checking into the hotel, and I heard waka, 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 waka. Instantly, I got bubble guts and diarrhea and went up to my room and puked for an hour. Because my body, my brain, this disease, thought I was about to get high. Just by hearing that Pac-Man machine, the phenomena of triggers which occur in the midbrain. Fascinating thing. So everything got really crazy. I'm going to speed ahead. My last Broadway adventure, I was hired to play Daddy Warbucks and Annie. I'm telling this story for Mike. And thank you for bringing me here. And Robert and Heidi. And it's just such an honor to be with you guys. So I was hired to play Daddy Warbucks and Annie. And that's the tall, bald guy. And before we opened on Broadway, we had to play 6 cities outside of New York. That's to get your timing down and make sure the show goes smooth. It's kind of like a working rehearsal. And we were in Albany, New York at the State Theater, which holds about 4,000 people. And this particular performance was $1,000 a ticket for an AIDS benefit. And that night, the governor of New York would be there, the mayor of New York City, lots of celebrities, and the New York press corps, the New York Times, the Daily News, the Post, Cindy Adams, Liz Smith, Frank Rich from the Times, New York Magazine. They were all going to be in the audience. And we had 65 adult actors, 30-piece orchestra, conductor, the tech staff, the administrative staff, 20 little orphan girls, their mothers, their teachers, their chaperones, Annie the dog, Sandy the dog's understudy, the dog trainers, 18 massive trucks full of equipment. It was a big deal. My days consisted of the following: wake up in the morning, knock back a scotch, smoke a joint, pop a Valium, go to the bathroom, knock back another scotch, pop another Valium, smoke another joint, get in bed. Smoke a little crack, stay in bed. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, dresser shows up, slaps me, gets me into the bathroom, gets me in the shower, off I go to the theater. I manage to do my show. I lay off drugs and alcohol till intermission. I do a little bit of Coke and 1 Jack Daniels neat. Then at night, I'm out in the nightclubs with Coke, hookers, and booze. Coke, hookers, and booze, Coke, hookers, and booze. Then before going to bed, I would eat copious amounts of eggs, pancakes, and orange juice to soak up the booze. Then I would inject heroin. And this was your grandfather's heroin, not this stuff that's going around today. It was real heroin. Inject heroin into my jugular to put myself to sleep. And when you do that kind of heroin, it opiates your digestive tract, as many of you know. And whatever food you've eaten gets trapped down there and it builds up pressure. And at some point, you open your mouth to yawn or say hello and you ninja vomit. Like I could knock your glasses off from here with a stream of puke. And so now it's the show. Audience is full, celebrities, men in tuxes, women in formals, the orchestra's playing. I've just told Annie that I'm going to adopt her. I'm itching, I'm seeing spots, and I'm sweating a lot. I don't feel good at all. I'm supposed to waltz with Annie. The Warbucks set disappears. The stage is flooded with dry ice. A twinkle drop appears with the night sky and the moon. It's beautiful, costs about $250,000. Every night when that thing went on, the audience would go, oh. So the orchestra starts playing. It's French horns and violins and the cellos. And I tell Annie I'm going to adopt her. And I put her little 9-year-old feet on my big feet. And I start showing her how to waltz. And we start waltzing around the stage as I'm singing a ballad called Something Was Missing. My brain. I'm choreographed at the end of the song to pick up the little girl, hold her in front of me, and hit the last note of the song. No one but... And I vomited right in Annie's face, point blank range. She screamed, the audience screamed. It made the papers. I kept puking. I dropped her on the floor. I started laughing like it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen because I was very inappropriate and selfish. They brought the curtain down and announced there would now be a 45-minute intermission. The producer came out, punched me in the face. I punched him. He punched me. I picked up a chair, started beating him with it. Then the police arrived, and I spent a few months in jail. That was the end of my Broadway career, needless to say. So I went back to my apartment in Times Square, and I tried to sell drugs to make a living, which I didn't do well at all. I was so paranoid, it was in Times Square, I was so paranoid that I would army crawl around the apartment because I didn't want the ninja police to see me through the window. And I spent a lot of time hiding under my bed. I didn't wear clothes. I would go out at night and mug people. I got arrested a couple of times. Breaking and entering, armed robbery, breaking and entering occupied dwelling. I used to mug people, beat them in the head, take their stuff and pawn it. Pawning just about everything that I owned. It got really ugly. One night I decided, and I looked like I had been in a concentration camp. I looked like a combination between Mel Gibson, Gary Busey, Nick Nolte, and Charles Manson, all on a very bad day. I made a decision to murder a drug dealer. I carried a gun all the time. And I met him in a park in Forest Hills, Queens in the middle of the night. I whipped the gun out, stuck in his face, pulled the trigger, and the gun jammed. Then his friends began to beat me. I had a broken sternum, 4 broken ribs, 2 stab wounds right up here. They grabbed my hair, cut it. They took a knife and cut me across this nostril and this eyelid. They stuffed my mouth with crack pipes, beat me in the face with a baseball bat. That's when I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was profusely bleeding, and they had defecated on me from head to toe. And if that hasn't happened to you, that's a yet. That's still waiting for all of us. You don't have to do it. I did it for you. I crawled out to the street. By the grace of God, a cab driver stopped for me. That man was in Narcotics Anonymous and tried to 12-step me. He helped me pick glass out of my mouth for about an hour, had some rags he tore off and helped stop some of the bleeding, wrapped me up in a blanket. I convinced him to take me back to my apartment. I had no keys. I had to break in through the bathroom window, and I crawled to the kitchen. I was starving. I opened the refrigerator. There was nothing in there but a carton of milk. I impulsively grabbed it, downed it. It had been spoiled for a very long time. I began to vomit. The sink filled up with amber liquid, which was Jack Daniels, with little white lumps of curdled milk. And in my psychotic state, I thought those little white lumps of milk was crack cocaine. So naturally, I stuck my face in the sink and lapped up my puke, spit out those little lumps, dried them off, stuffed them in a broken crack pipe, and tried to smoke my puke. And when that didn't work, I was done with this life. I had a mason jar with about 200 Vicodin in it in the hall closet and 1 more bottle of Jack Daniels. I guzzled that Jack. I took all the Vicodin. Well, you could see it if my sleeves were unbuttoned. I took a big knife and I cut my wrists, under my arms, and my elbows so I would bleed out as fast as possible. And I laid down on the floor in a pool of blood, hoping to die, to leave this dense plane. And suddenly I had a moment of clarity. It was like a voice inside my head said, "You don't want death, you want more life and don't know how to get it. I'm going to show you." And suddenly my mind was flooded with thoughts about an actor I had worked with named Richard Springle. He played Colonel Pickering to my Henry Higgins in the world tour of My Fair Lady, the Broadway show. He was always very kind to me. I'd never been to his house, hadn't spoken to him on the phone in 3 or 4 years. And suddenly I remembered his phone number. I crawled to my landline. I called. He answered. I said, "Colonel, I'm dying, help." And then I passed out. He called information, 411, asked for Bruce Kimball in Akron, Ohio. He knew my father, got my address. Turns out he lived directly across Times Square from me. Is it odd or is it God? He made a beeline across Times Square. The doorman didn't want to let him in. He screamed at him to call an ambulance, punched the doorman, went into the building, broke my front door apart, found me covered with feces and blood, blue, not breathing, carried me into the elevator, out of the building, and into a waiting ambulance. I regained consciousness about 2 weeks later, strapped onto a gurney in a psych ward in a facility in New Jersey. And I knew that I had hit my bottom because I was in New Jersey. I love to laugh. I'm so done with suffering. That began the first of 19 trips to treatment. I got high every time I walked out the door. That was over a period of 4 years. And in treatment, here comes solution. I met 2 men, Mel and Edgar. Edgar's father was one of the first 87 members of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was a calligrapher. He created those red and black signs that say, think, 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 live, let live. That was Edgar's father's calligraphy that we're still using today. Edgar did his steps with Bill W. and a man named Hank Parkhurst who helped get the big book published. He was Bill's first sponsee in New York, and he wrote 2 of the chapters in the big book, To Wives and to the Employer. And Edgar did his steps with Bill and Hank. The other gentleman's name was Mel Barger, Mel B. He wrote 5 of the books that are listed in the front of the big book. Pass It On, AA Comes of Age, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. He edited As Bill Sees It. He was AA's official historian and archivist, and the editor of the International AA Grapevine magazine. He was also Bill W.'s traveling companion and gave the eulogy at Lois Wilson's funeral. And Mel and Edgar were great pals. And Mel was in New York at the time writing a book on Ebby Thatcher. In any event, I got to know these men over a period of 4 years. And my last time in treatment, they showed up and they had me discharged. They rode the train back to New York. They took my keys, strip searched me, had me pack a bag, convinced me to sign paperwork making Father Edgar, he was a retired Episcopal priest, and he became my guardian. And I was 35 years old, been on Broadway, traveled around the world, and they treated me like a 5-year-old on a mommy leash. They said, whatever's happening in New York when the sun goes down is none of your damn business. You're not allowed outside alone without adult supervision, is what they told me. We did the steps quickly and often, as they were designed to be done in the explicit, specific, clear-cut directions that are found in the first 164 pages of a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, today that book is on the Library of Congress's list of the top 50 books that most transformed American society in the 20th century, making it one of the most important documents ever written in American history. That's according to the Library of Congress. The big book is now translated into 72 languages and is available in 194 countries. Amazing. And has transformed the lives of tens of millions of people. So I did what Edgar and Mel told me to do. I went to 6 to 8 meetings a day. I got my first sponsee when I had 30 days. That's how it was done in the old days when we had a 50 to 75% permanent sobriety rate as opposed to 3 to 5% today. It was done quickly and often. The 4th step was a simple checklist. A drunken monkey could do it in 20 minutes. It didn't take weeks and weeks and weeks. You didn't write a novel. It wasn't like that. My favorite quote from Dr. Bob, he said, the 12 steps are not spiritual philosophies to be studied, understood, and then taken. They are survival actions to be carried out immediately to provide instant hope and relief and save our lives. They are a tourniquet to stop the bleeding now. It is battlefield triage. Totaled 11 automobiles. I terrorized my family. I lost my Broadway career. I lost my sanity, my legal freedom, my bank account, my physical health, all of my friends, 2 marriages. All of that because of my active addiction. I just thought I'm a bad person. My family thought I was a bad person because they thought this was a choice. I thought it was a choice. The most life-changing moment was when Mel and Edgar sat down and we read the doctor's opinion in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was so fascinated by that, I went to school again and studied neurobiology because I wanted to understand why the steps worked for people who didn't believe in God, and I wanted to know more about brain mechanics and what exactly happened to me. Do we still have time? How much time do I have?
You're good, Gary.
You good?
You're good.
You sure?
This is important stuff.
My grandpa was a preacher, and I'd call him sometime on Sunday and say, how'd it go today at the service? And he'd say, preached him down to 2. So that might happen. You know, those are the 2 you need to reach. So I studied neurobiology. I really wanted to understand the addicted brain. Excuse me. So, this is my mission, to educate people about this through the lens of 2024 neuroscience. And I'll tell you what, Bill W., that book had to be guided by the hand of some divine power. Because Bill was a night school lawyer, dropout. He invented insider trading. He was a very sketchy guy, but he was brilliant. He didn't know about neuroscience, but he nailed it. He observed every single detail. He even describes, I think it's on page 22, at certain times we are unable to pull forth into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the humiliation and degradation of a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. He is describing a phenomenon called amygdala hijack. You can Google it, look it up. Addiction, amygdala, Amygdala, amygdala hijack. So we addicts and alcoholics, we've got a number of defects. You know, I even hate calling them defects now. Because for me, all of those, oh, bless your heart. Thank you. I'll even give you the whole priest blessing. There you go.
Him or the water?
I could do both. I could bless this and asperge everyone. Okay, give me 1 second to open this. Oh, thank you, God. All right, so I hate calling them defects now, really, because those defects have turned into my assets. They're the greatest gifts I've ever been given. Because I... Thank you, God, for keeping me humble. Next, my teeth will fall out. That happened one time on stage playing Bill W. One tooth fell out and it bounced. Everybody watched it, and then it went into the orchestra pit. In the next scene, some guy says, "Mr. Wilson, I found your tooth." Anyway, to be a disease, there must be a defect in an organ. And that defect produces symptoms. For instance, you blow your pancreas out, it's not producing insulin. You now have a disease called diabetes, or diabetes, as some people like to say. For 100 years, medicine chased the symptoms. Dizziness, dry mouth, blindness, neuropathy, all kinds of things. They chased the symptoms, and everybody died from diabetes in childhood. Now, we chase the defect. You solve the defect, you solve the disease. So we replace the insulin, symptoms go away. Ski down a mountain, 200 miles an hour, slam into a pine tree, shatter your femur. Femur rips through the skin. Now you have a disease, because the femur is an organ that produces blood cells. So now you got a disease. Everybody that has that condition is going to have the same symptoms. Weakness, radiating pain, bleeding, infection. So you disinfect, you knit the bone, you put a cast on it, you sew up the skin, you stay off of it, and in time, the defect heals, and now you no longer have a broken femur. And anybody that has that broken femur has the same disease, same symptoms. So we call this a disease. Why do we call it a disease? We have a bunch of defects. Number one, we have faulty neurotransmitters. Number two, we addicts and alcoholics do not produce a sufficient quantity and quality of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter needed by the brain so that we can have a sense of well-being and be present in life. Every time we take an action that leads to survival, we get dopamine. The dopamine passes through the VT, that's called the ventral tegmenta. That's the pleasure track. It sorts out the neurotransmitters, and if it says, wow, a lot of dopamine, it sends a signal to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is memory associated with survival. It sends a signal to the hippocampus and says, hey, hippocampus, this is a lot of dopamine. Remember this and repeat this action always. Now there's a neural pathway in the brain for life. There's an area called the amygdala, Amygdala. The amygdala does not have language attached. It doesn't think. So it doesn't know you have a job or kids or that there are consequences. It doesn't know about morality. It doesn't know that if Gary smokes crack, Gary will end up being chained to a bed naked wearing a clown mask in the middle of Times Square. It doesn't know that. that there's consequence, because it doesn't think, doesn't have language. It compels us to take action that keeps us alive. First thing it does, it makes us breathe. It makes us drink water, sleep, eat food, have sex so the species can survive, and protect ourselves in fight or flight. Question for everybody. Can you hold your breath until you die?
No.
You're correct. That's the amygdala doing its job. You don't choose to breathe. You're going to breathe. If I jumped up and jumped on Damien, our wonderful juggler, with my big fat ass, and I'm sitting on your chest, and I put a plastic bag on your head and duct tape your neck, what are you going to do to get that plastic bag off your head? You'll do whatever you have to do, right? You'd kill me if you had to, because you need to survive. You're going to breathe. When you do, you get dopamine. So the hippocampus says, repeat this, and we keep breathing. Same thing happens with drinking water, sleeping, eating food, having sex, and protecting ourselves. It promotes survival. Now, crazy defect. When Gary took his first drink, there was an abnormal flood of dopamine. That happened because the nucleus accumbens, which produces the dopamine, is faulty. And the alcohol triggers an overproduction of dopamine. Our brains have been starved for this dopamine. Kind of getting off the subject a little bit. Is anybody here, when you were a kid, did you feel like you didn't get the memo? Like you didn't know how to do life and everybody else seemed to know how to do life? That happened to me. That was a lack of neurotransmitters, chemistry in the brain, lack of dopamine, epinephrine, and serotonin. So now I've got this flood of dopamine. It rips through the ventral tegmenta. The ventral tegmenta says to the hippocampus and the parietal frontal lobe and the basal ganglia, gets all those bad boys involved and says, oh my God, there's a tsunami of dopamine. This is better than sex, filet mignon, water, sleeping, or protecting ourselves, or breathing. This is life itself. And a neuropathway is carved into the brain for life that says alcohol equals survival. The drug equals survival. That is not a choice. That is carved into the brain now. Now I'm living my life. I'm not a psychopath or a sociopath. I have a conscience. I love my mother. I say something awful to her. I can see that she's hurt. Now I feel guilt, and I feel shame, and I feel remorse, and I feel fear. Guilt, shame, remorse, resentment, anger, fear all produce cortisol, which is a stress hormone. It floods the amygdala. The amygdala is in pain. It rears its head. It swells up in size. It gives it the ability to override rational thought. That's what allows a good and moral person to kill if they're attacked. It overrides the rational mind. It's called amygdala hijack. The amygdala disconnects communication with the cortex. When that happens, the cortex fails to process. All thoughts of not using are trapped in the cortex. All thoughts of consequence are trapped in the cortex. All thoughts about my sobriety, about my kids, about my job are trapped in the cortex. I can't go in and think those thoughts. And the amygdala that doesn't think goes to the bar, calls the dope boy. Then I get high, I come down, I can't believe it's happened again. I feel more guilt, more shame, more remorse. Again, my brain is flooded with cortisol. It sends out the signal, get the drug, get the drug, get the drug. It demands relief, and the go-to is now the drug, more important than air, food, or water. So I go get the drug. I have no choice. That's what Bill was describing when he said at certain times we are unable to pull forth into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the humiliation and degradation of a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. Then, of course, once I put it in my body, the allergy kicks in. If it's alcohol, I don't have enough liver enzymes to convert the alcohol quickly into a carbohydrate. As it's converting it from ethanol to acetaldehyde to diacetic acid, it gets stuck at the level of acetone. That creates the phenomenon of craving. Now the brain detects this toxic acetone. It says, here's another defect. We need more acetone to get rid of the acetone that's already there, and that demands a second drink. Now I got even more acetone. That demands a third drink. The more I drink, the harder I crave. If it's a drug, it's called hyperalgesia. It's in the brain. It makes pain more acute than it should be, and as the drug leaves the neuroreceptor, it causes acute emotional pain, and the amygdala now is in pain again. It demands relief. It says, get the drug, and I have to do another hit, and another hit, and another hit, and another hit, and I can't stop. And of course, it makes a mess of my life, and I feel guilt, shame, remorse, resentment, anger, and fear, which produces more cortisol, which inflames the amygdala. Here comes the mental obsession. Get the drug, get the drug, get the drug. Amygdala hijack. The cortex fails to process. It goes to sleep. I can't access thoughts of not using, and I go use again. And around and around and around we go. One night I went to Merchant's Cigar Bar in New York City, and I was drinking heavily, and I met this batshit crazy woman named Marcia. God bless her. She died a long time ago from this disease. We got really hammered. I said, let's go to my Times Square apartment and get really twisted. I've got some saline bags with morphine, my own IV drip machine, lots of crack. She says, great, here we go. We went, we did a lot of twisted things, so we thought we should get married. And she moved in the next day. We had a knockdown drag out. It was ugly. I left the apartment. I got more high, more drunk than I ever had in my life. I end up in jail. When that happened, my hippocampus, its job is to keep me alive. It's working with the amygdala. The hippocampus remembers conditions of our life that help us stay high and drunk. It also is the part of the brain that learns how to tell if food is rotten, where to get the food, how to cook the food, how to eat the food, what food's good to eat, what food isn't good to eat. It learns all that information. It's working to keep us alive. Now it's learned information about how to keep Gary drunk and high. Emotional disturbance gets me drunk and high because it causes amygdala hijack, which causes the mental obsession, which causes the cortex to go to sleep. So I got more drunk and high that night than I ever had before. I ended up in jail. My hippocampus now has a formula. Marcia plus Gary equals fight, equals drugs and alcohol, equals survival. Now, Marcia's not a sex partner, not a girlfriend. She is a delivery system for the drug. And this is a phenomenon of triggers. Wow. And this is why we can't stop. Why can't they stop? Frothy emotional appeal, our loved ones begging us to stop because they could, and we can't. And that happens whether I win the lottery or my house burns to the ground. Whether it's a nice day or a shitty day. My brain is flooded with cortisol. All my old resentments keep the cortisol in my brain. All my lack of forgiveness keeps the cortisol in the brain. 24/7, I'm walking around with a brain saturated with stress hormones. It doesn't take much for my brain to say, I know a solution, get the drug. Get the drug, get the drug, get the drug. It gets louder and louder and louder. And the amygdala disconnects from the cortex, and I can't stop myself from picking up. So what is the solution? Well, number one, we got to reduce the cortisol in the midbrain. Steps 4 through 9 give us relief. They are comfort for us. They give us relief from guilt, shame, remorse, resentment, anger, and fear, thereby reducing cortisol levels. Therapy also helps reduce cortisol levels. 4 through 9. Then in step 10, we practice no longer causing pain and suffering for ourselves or other people. I defy you to work step 10 every day and stay the same person. You will change and grow. If we stay the same person we were, that person got high. A change must occur. An entire psychic change if there's any hope of our recovery. Steps 4 through 9 give us relief. Now, here's the fascinating thing to me. I wanted to know why I had friends who were of other cultures, other faiths, lack of faith, atheists, and they got sober using the 12 steps. As it turns out, When you take spiritual action, helping other people, step 12, service, dramatically alters how the neurons interact in the cortex. They have a party. Did you ever get goosebumps? The hairs stand up in the back of your neck when you pray and meditate, or you do kind things for other people, or you talk about truth. The neurons are going crazy in the cortex, and we can choose to create this condition. When we do that, our thinking leaves our midbrain where our addiction lives, and it moves to the cortex, which is our spiritual center. When we're kind, when we're loving, when we do unselfish things, the neurons go nuts and they start producing more glutamate. That's another defect we addicts have and alcoholics. We don't produce enough glutamate, which is needed to calm the amygdala and the impulses that are happening there. So by simply praying and meditating, being kind, doing service, no matter what your belief is or your lack of belief, if you take those actions, you change brain function. And it allows us to sustain recovery. And our midbrain calms down, and we're now living out of the front of our brain. The big book tells us many times a day we remind ourselves we are no longer running the show, saying, "Thy will be done." These thoughts of God consciousness, these God thoughts must go with us constantly, it says. And we practice step 10, that's taking out the trash every day to keep the vessel clean. After we've taken the time to clean it out with steps 4 through 9, we got to keep it clean. That's daily housekeeping, as Dr. Bob calls it. Trust God, clean house, help others. It's that simple. Thanks God, I'll never be able to repay AA for the gifts that I've been given. And I'm so grateful to be here with you all. If anybody's interested to learn more about this, come and grab one of my flyers, go on my website. I have some of these talks you could share with your loved ones about the neuroscience. It helps them enormously to understand that we're not bad people, that we were ill, and that recovery is possible. So I think I'm done talking. God bless you all. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you.